And obviously, there's rewards and punishments for various activities that you might partake in while in attendance to this virtual school or to the school where points are either added or deducted from your grade, depending on what you're doing. Depending on whether you answering questions, whether you are listening, how much do you attend, how often do you attend, how well is your attention on the subjects at hand. And obviously there's the final examination, which obviously if you fail, then you can't write for another few months, or you can't write that same test again for a few months, or maybe even half a year, because you need to go relearn what it is. So I'm by no means saying that the system I'm suggesting for schooling and all of that is flawless, or it's perfect, or it doesn't have its flaws. It does, like everything else, but I'm seeing that it is something In Your Head Productions is capable of facilitating based on what the company is themed around. The name In Your Head Productions, school is definitely a part of that. But anyway, I won't go on too long about the schools. I just gave right now a quick 10-15 minutes or 10-15 videos about it, and I'll move on. I'll just leave it there. It's archived, and I'll move on to another subject because this one's going to be exciting. Alright, it's time to move on to something a little bit more entertaining, or a subject that might be a little bit less boring to some. Let's talk about money. I mean, most people love money. So now, I made some very bold claims earlier in this presentation about how In Your Head Productions has other ways of making money, and if we go ahead with this project, I mean, if you've watched the channel and you've watched everything up until now, there have been a lot of radical ideas, there have been a lot of suggestions and a lot of things we can do with this, and it feels like it's going to cost a lot of money, but how is it going to recoup that cost and make profit in the future? Well, this has led to a very interesting story when asking, how can In Your Head Productions make money? Because what I'm about to reveal, it took me many years in front of the artwork to figure out that the company might be able to do something. And what I'm about to suggest, I urge you to prepare and stay very open-minded about it, because it's going to sound perhaps ridiculous, but I urge you to wait till you've heard the entire story, and you can visit the channel to see the entire story. I urge you to listen to the entire story before making a conclusion. So many years ago, when I was in a setup like this, the artwork was a bit different back then, but in the studio I used to have a jar on one of my tables, a jar that I used to put spare change in, like after going to the shop or whatever and having change. I used to have a jar that I used to put coins in, and I did that for many years while deciding what to do or coming up with ideas and just doing the normal things. And one day I looked at the jar and realized I was the only one putting money in the jar. And why was that? Why is nobody else putting money in the jar? It's not an attack on anybody or whatever. It was just a thing. It's like I'm the only one putting money in this jar. And then I even had like a mini argument with myself. Like I was like, why are you even asking that question? Why am I the only one putting money in this jar? It's your jar. And then I viewed it in context of the entire studio and the entire office of where I was, and I was like, well, actually, I started to think of it as the company jar, like putting money in the company, like an account almost. Like I started to visualize it like that. While this is important, we'll get to that. I'm just saying how this idea came about in my mind when looking at this jar that I used to put coins in, my spare change or whatever. I started to view it in this space as the company jar. That's pretty much what I'm getting at. Then I started saying, okay, well, why am I the only one? How do we get people to put money in the jar? Metaphorically, that's what I was saying. How do we get people to put money in the jar for the company? And I started thinking of that situation, and I was like, but I went a step further after that, and I was like, but how can the company put money in its own jar? And it's like, what do you mean? There's no money, there's no money. How can the company In Your Head Productions put money in its own jar? And you have to remember, I was still thinking about the application, and I was like, I'm walking around in a virtual desktop or a prototype of a virtual desktop. So I started to think of the jar as digital. And it's like, I don't understand, it's not making sense. How or what if the company can put money in its own jar? Instead of going through the hassle of trying to convince people and all of that and bothering them in their busy days and overcharge them for products and things like that and go through all those processes, those complicated processes of getting them to put money in the jar, what if the company could put money in its own jar? And then something went off, and I was like, but how? And I stared at that jar for a good couple of weeks before I came up with something that it serves as a metaphor. The why I'm talking about the jar is that it serves as a metaphor as to how I thought about this. And then I was like, but what are the places with the most money? Like and then I started to think about banks, naturally. That came to mind. Like, banks have a lot of money. Like, well, how do they handle it and whatever? But then I thought, okay, yeah, but where does money get made? At a central bank. Most countries have a central bank where they print the money officially, and it's an official thing, and a lot of security procedures, a lot of protocols, make sure they're not printing too much money or too little money, and a lot of things. But the central bank is where I stopped, and I was like, yes, central bank. That is what In Your Head Productions needs. And this was all while staring at a jar with just a few coins in it, remember? I was like, a central bank. That is what In Your Head Productions needs. And that jar is that account. Like, it was a metaphor for that account in my mind. Like, what if In Your Head Productions had a central bank? And that jar was like a power core. Like, that is the account. That's where everything comes from. That's where all the money is going to come from. Then I started to think, okay, but how do you measure that? How much money? How much money could it print? And I'm not talking about printing paper money. I'm talking about a digital currency now. How much could it print? What would be viable?